Do you know what really annoys me, and many other people? When animation is referred to as a genre. This is done by streaming services, professional film critics, even reference materials. For example, I have the book 1001 Films You Must See Before You Die, which is considered basically the Bible of people who really want to explore how film came to be, and some of its most notable entries. Even it considers animation just a genre. Let's be clear. Animation is a medium. It is not a genre. This is not up for dispute. If you call it a genre, you are inaccurate. But why is this a problem? Why do so many animation nerds, or, people actually in the industry, why do they have a problem with people labeling animation as a genre? The answer is manyfold. The most obvious problem is that it's limiting in both what is done with animation and how audiences receive animation. By definition, a genre must follow a certain set of tropes or conventions. A Western must take place in the Old West. If it doesn't, then it's not a Western. A horror must invoke feelings of fear or discomfort. Of course, the line isn't always so well defined. Big Fish isn't what I'd call a fantasy movie, but it has many fantastical elements. And as technology progresses, what was once called science fiction becomes not. But there is a hard limit in pretty much every single genre, where if this subject doesn't have this particular thing, then it is not of that genre. Animation needs to be animated. However, that would be such a broad genre definition as to be useless. What you could do with animation is literally anything. That is the strongest draw of the medium. That's its specialty. But beyond that, besides the fact that every single work of animation is animated, with almost any piece of animation, you could give it another genre. Spirited Away is a fantasy movie. Titan AE is science fiction. Coraline is a horror movie. Chicken Run is a prison escape movie. The Incredibles is a superhero film. The only times you couldn't ascribe another genre to work is if it just relies on the animation without any sort of narrative, like with Heaven and Earth Magic. Oh wait, you could ascribe another genre. That is the avant-garde genre, or abstract film genre if you prefer. It's the same thing with television series. The Simpsons and Flintstones are not in the animation genre, they are sitcoms. Futurama and Rick and Morty are science fiction. We Bare Bears and Friendship is Magic are slice of life. Avatar: The Last Airbender is fantasy. Jackie Chan Adventures is martial arts. Samurai Jack is a lot of things, but it's action-adventure. You can't do this with a genre. You can't take, say, a list of the 100 most defining films in that genre and also ascribe them another genre. You can't say that The Exorcist, Halloween, and Friday the 13th are horror movies, but they're also X, Y, or Z. Sure, you could give them subgenres, but they're still horror movies, plain and through. And let's not forget that by taking away a film's animation, it doesn't change the genre that the film is, what the audience goes into the film to experience. The 1991 animated Beauty and the Beast is a musical romance. The 2017 live-action remake is also a musical romance. But so far, it's just been semantics. The reason that most people tend to complain about this is because of the baggage loaded behind the quote-unquote animation genre. As I said before, genres have a set amount of tropes that must be followed to be considered that genre. These are the stereotypes of the quote-unquote animation genre. Number 1, they must be either aimed specifically at children or be set apart specifically because they are not aimed at children. The fact that all children's media tends to be considered its own genre is a similar problem, but one topic per video. Number 2, the stories and themes are often very similar without much worthy of analysis. Number 3, it takes place in a fantasy world that utilizes magic, and that magic can come without any real explanation. It's always low fantasy, not high fantasy. Think Dungeons & Dragons as opposed to Lord of the Rings. Number 4, the primary purpose is to make you laugh before it is to make you cry, think, or anything else. And this is probably where I'm going to strike a nerve, but in all honesty, this needs to be said. A lot of the stereotype has become deserved in this decade. I've been reviewing animation for the past 5 years. I've watched more and more films, and I've noticed a few trends and tropes that have come up over and over again. And they're not dying simply because that's what's expected of an animated film. I complained and rallied against many of these things myself, and many times in the past. Every animated film of the past decade or so has been a road trip film, essentially. It stars a protagonist, usually on the bottom of society, but sometimes on the top of society as the leader. Ralph from Wreck-It Ralph or Emmett from the Lego Movie are good examples of the former. Joy is a good example of the latter. Something thrusts them out of their known life, and the rest of the movie could be seen as a road trip movie. They travel from place to place in a fantasy world, basically seeing the sights in new, wacky environments. This is what I'd call the story of the animation genre. Inside Out, the Lego Movie, the Emoji Movie, Friendship is Magic movie, Moana. Let me ask you, think to the past decade, try to name 5 animated movies that took place roughly at the same place. They do exist, like How to Train Your Dragon or Coraline, and when they do come up, they tend to be a breath of fresh air for this exact reason. This is exceptionally a big problem when it comes to the movie adaptations of television series. The Simpsons movie, the SpongeBob movie, the first one, and the Friendship is Magic movies are about the homeland that we've known so well getting threatened by some evil, immoral external force, and the character must venture outside of this place we've grown to love and stop this force. It's interesting that what you try to do to make the movie bigger makes it more trite and, well, boring, more cliche. I didn't like the Friendship is Magic movie because it was the most stereotypical animated film that I've ever seen. It followed every convention that I expected from an animated film, and it just expected to get away with it because that's what you're supposed to do when you're the film of an animated television series. If there is an animation genre, the Friendship is Magic movie would be the most defining example of it.
It is time, yeah, time to be awesome. Awesome, it's time to be so awesome. Awesome, it's time to be so awesome.
Oh please, you've had 22-minute episodes that had more creativity and originality put into them. Speaking of that, could you imagine a non-Pixar animated film that didn't have musical numbers? It almost wouldn't be an animated film. Do you see what I'm getting at? Could you imagine a theatrical animated film that isn't rated PG? Well, yes you could, and let's get this out of the way. Sausage Party doesn't count to anything in this video. In fact, it doesn't help, even ignoring what happened behind the scenes. It's what you could call a parody of this animation genre. A trope of the animation genre is that they follow your whatever when you're not looking. This makes sense as Toy Story was the first 3D feature animated film ever released. And one thing that the animation industry is good at doing is following decades-old conventions, even when they're no longer relevant. The reason that they're not releasing 2D animated films in the West? That's because Treasure Planet bombed over a decade and a half ago. This is what they'll argue. Most animated films follow what your toys, your emojis, your video games, your pets, your whatevers are doing when you're not looking. So Sausage Party parodied this trope of the unquote-unquote animation genre, and made it disturbing. It was also made sure that it was rated R because that's exactly what you wouldn't expect when it comes to an animated film. You see, Sausage Party is kind of the exception that proves the problem in animated films in the 2010s. Sausage Party would not work so well if animated films were more diverse in ratings, in topics, in genre. I'm not surprised that Sausage Party was a successful R-rated animated film. It wasn't like Charlie Kaufman was releasing an animated film. Again. Honestly, making sure that you try to hit a specific age demographic is stupid for artistic merits, whether for kids or adults. This has become a major problem with comedy and the horror genres. People are so concerned with making horror movies PG-13 for more money that they forget to make their films scary, and they make their comedy films so disgusting to get that R rating that they're not funny anymore. The best animated films clearly weren't trying to get a specific rating or a specific demographic. Films like Mary and Max, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Spirited Away, or Snow White. Do you think that any of those films numbed their plot to make it more appealing to younger audiences, or added a bunch of to say, look, we're not like those other girls. I mean, animated films. Let me put it this way. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is rated G. Home on the Range is rated PG. Hollywood studios know how to get any rating that they want. A big problem with the public perception of animation comes from those who are at the top of the industry. Yes, I'm talking about Disney. In the 2000s, Disney had a difficult time. But look at the canon from that era. While it was certainly hit and miss, there really wasn't a trend between all the films. They were of distinct genres. Road trip, adventure, science fiction, comedy. And this era was home to some of their best films of all time. Lilo and Stitch and The Emperor's New Groove. Neither of those films were at all like typical Disney fare. Flash forward to the current day. The most recent film in the animated canon was a story about a princess that wanted more than her tiny enclosed place that goes on a quest with magic. And unlike most of these other animated road trips, this one takes place mostly on the ocean. Not even like under the ocean, just the top of the ocean. I hope that you like the color blue because that's what you'll be seeing for like 95% of the movie. Also, there's a story about a demigod trying to claim his honor, which I've seen. Yeah, not the biggest fan of Moana either. And this month, they're going to be releasing Wreck-It Ralph 2, which people are afraid is going to be like the Emoji Movie. There definitely seems to be an upcoming dirge of creativity, and it's very, very foreboding. But the biggest problem with Disney is these live-action remakes. It's clear that the only reason that they're live-action is to try and appeal to a wider audience who don't want to go to the theater to see quote-unquote kid stuff. There are many reasons to object to Disney making these live-action remakes, but right now I'll stick to what's relevant. The Lion King remake is going to star completely CGI characters on live-action backgrounds. This is exactly the same as Dinosaur, which in the United States isn't just considered an animated film, but it's part of the Disney animated canon. What's the difference between Dinosaur and the Lion King live-action remake? The difference is that in the 2010s, Disney is becoming afraid of the stigma of the animation genre. And it does feel exceptionally sad when one of the biggest animation companies in the world feels like it's trying to bury animation, especially since the only upcoming animated films from them are sequels. And I know the thoughts on everyone's mind. Breaking away from any of these conventions is a risk. Yes, I'm not going to argue that. It's a risk to make an animated film that doesn't follow this repetitive formula. It's a risk to make an animated film that's R or PG-13, that's not just a parody of a PG film. It's a risk to make an animated film that's not a fairy tale fantasy or a road trip film, but that's why it has to be done, because not taking risks is killing the animation industry. When Walt Disney was making Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, people thought that he was insane. People thought that he was going to destroy his company and everything that he worked for in creating this film. If you're just joining us, that didn't happen. Snow White essentially created his company and his brand. It'd be wise to do what he said once in a while, but not all the time. After he died, the people in charge of his company made all their decisions based on what Walt wanted to do. They followed the safe options in the 70s and 80s, and it was considered their dark age. Most of the films of that era are bland and boring. The exception is The Black Cauldron. It was originally planned to be a PG-13 film, a complete departure from what Disney was known for. However, halfway through production, it was completely broken apart to be more like a traditional Disney fare, and it's known as one of Disney's worst outings. Compare that to a Disney live-action film that was completely fine with being PG-13, Pirates of the Caribbean, which people tend to really like, except when it stopped taking risks and made copy-paste sequel after copy-paste sequel. Let me ask you this. Does Who Framed Roger Rabbit seem like a safe option? So many properties from so many different companies, all in not just a film, but a hybrid film, something which hadn't really been attempted to this scale. Do you think that making the first CG feature film a kids film didn't seem like a risk? Of course, those paid off. I won't say that taking a great risk always works well. We've seen plenty of examples of this over the years. The motion capture Zemeckis studio was clearly a risk that ended up blowing up. If taking risks were safe, they wouldn't be called taking risks, now would they? But history is made of risk, and when no risks are made, industries become stagnant and they start to fail. And if anyone could afford to take a risk, wouldn't you think it would be the company synonymous with animation? Or maybe the company that's making the most profitable films of all time, like Illumination? But no, they just follow the formula of the animation genre to a T. If we want people to stop calling animation a genre, we do need to stop treating it like one. We need more PG-13 or R-rated films, ones that aren't just parody of PG ones. While Pixar themselves are being very creative, they do need to get out of their own conventions. We need more films like Mary and Max, Anomalisa, or It's Such a Beautiful Day. Granted, not all of them are going to work very well, and not all of them are going to get an audience immediately, but we do need them. We need Disney to make more films like Lilo and Stitch or The Emperor's New Groove, and less like Moana, or the live-action Lilo and Stitch. If you want to stop schlock like the Emoji Movie, make it a little harder for hack filmmakers to follow this formula that's become unbreakable over the past decade, cause it's an uphill battle to get animation any sort of respect in the mainstream audiences. When Beauty and the Beast was nominated for Best Picture, the Oscars almost immediately added the category for Best Animated Picture. This was not animation's big debut of making it. This was not to make animation seem more relevant or more important. In the years after this category was established, it was clear that there weren't really enough mainstream animated films to truly support such a category. The category for Best Animated Picture was made so that the Oscars would never have to nominate an animated film for Best Picture ever again. Animated films only started to be nominated for Best Picture again after the amount of nominees was expanded. But even so, even with that, it's hard to imagine an animated film winning Best Picture. At least, it's as hard to do that as imagining a theatrical animated film doing something as daring as taking place in a world without any magical elements whatsoever. Or do something so insane as to not pick a rating other than PG. Or follow a plot type other than the hero's journey. And we all know that that's never going to happen. Right?